early on, a lot of the music that I was mixing was just straight hip-hop, which really required, the parameters of which required, really strong bottom. And I didn't want that to be the only issue, the only thing that you heard. I wanted to make sure that the vocals still sounded like great classic R&B records that I was used to listening to as well. So I just devised a way to make that work, and essentially it's just sculpting the overall sonic landscape of the song itself to fit the vocal, but still have a nice round bottom. Every mix that's done is custom. It's a custom job. So, although I may have some presets and things that we'll talk about later that I draw from, generally it's all custom work. It depends on the song, depends on the vocalist, the timbre of the vocalist that day, the microphone, the recordist, and the programmer, if there is programming, or the drummer and recordist, if it's live instruments. But the technique that I used, that I started using very early on, was that I use compression in much the way that the multi-band compressors are used today in the plugins. I use compression in that way, only I don't use it as a plugin. Quite often, although I've learned and started using the multi-band compression plugins, what I do quite often is separate sounds into their frequency range. And kick drums are, from say 20 hertz to 80 hertz. And then, of course, they span the whole range, but depending on what I'm looking for, I may boost just between 30 and 80, and then dip a little bit in that lower mid spot, and then boost another section of that kick drum, another spot at maybe 1 to 4K, just so I get a little click up here and I get a little boof down here, and then I compress them differently, so that what I'm compressing in the upper ranges of the kick drum, I may be compressing those a lot harder, and the boof can do this and come out more. But the punch from the upper registers of that kick drum are getting snapped and grabbed by the compressor. So the lower frequencies are allowed to come out, and the higher frequencies are being, clamped down on. I have speakers that I trust, and essentially with every mix that I do, I'm listening to minimum 6 sets of speakers. The car, the headphones, I use Tannoy's DMT-12s, I use PROAC Studio 100s, I have a set of computer speakers, little tiny, little computer speakers, and I have a big audiophile system. And I have like my old college, used stereo with a blown speaker, So I just go through all of those and play it. Not to mention my clients, the artist will, I'll be working with somebody in LA, and we'll think that the mix is close, and I'll say to them, all right, get out in your truck or get out in your car and play it, and call me from the truck, basically. And then we talk about it from their perspective as well. And a lot of my clients, Puffy used to do this quite often. He would just take it to the club and play it. How does it sound on the system? He called me from the club, not enough, or a little more, or, vocals not coming through enough, that kind of thing. Snap is, the technical definition of it would be a slow attack and a quick release on a compressor. So that allows the transient of, in this case, say a snare drum, to come through, and because it has a slow attack, it gets grabbed after that. So you hear the transient come through, and then the body of the snare drum gets, grabbed. And essentially that just gives it a snap feel, you know? It gives it a snap sound where you hear the beginning of it really clearly and snap through, and then the rest of it gets grabbed and punched. And you can do that with a bass that's being hit or strung, being poked hard. You can, so that the pick or the snap comes through, or it can be a kick drum where you hear the beginning of the kick drum and then the bottom of it gets grabbed. A snare drum, obviously. Anything that has a transient. But can I tell you a song of mine that you can listen to and hear it? I hope not. I hope you don't. I hope that's not the thing that's drawing you to the song. But it should make those instruments audible at a low volume as well as a high volume. You should be able to. That's one of the techniques that's used to allow that, those instruments to be heard, and to be heard with all of their energy at a lower volume. Or maybe they're just lower in the mix as well. And that's just the technique that's used. It's about a third of what I do is in the box. I have a setup that I call a hybrid setup that is an analog summing setup where I use high quality Class A summing amp, summing mixers, Chandler summing mixer, and a Neve summing mixer. Actually, it's a Neve Melbourne console that I use, as well as a Dangerous 2-bus. And I use quite a lot of the analog compression that I've been using for the past 20 years. 1176, LA3As, GML 8200, Allen Smart C2, Neve 33609. So I use lots of outboard EQ and compression. I've got a bunch of Neve and API EQ, some SSL stuff that I rely on, as I have relied on from the beginning of my mixing career. Is there any mixes that I'm particularly proud of that are out right now? The We Sing, We Dance record, the Jason Mraz record, that Martin Terefe produced. The Liz Wright record that I did with Craig Street. Again, just amazing. Recordists involved as well, and that obviously plays a major part in my ability to hear emotionally where the record needs to go. The Fergie stuff that I did as well. And I did a record for Sony recently as well. Amy Mariello, great artist, great production. So, I'm lucky in that way. There were some great artists, great producers I've worked with. So, yeah, I've got a lot of things I'm happy with.